Some forests are quiet. Hoia Baciu is silent. It waits on the slope above Cluj-Napoca, bare-limbed, gnarled, rooted in more stories than it shows. Nothing screams here. Not animals, not people, because this forest does not frighten in the usual way. It simply removes. First the sound, then the sense of distance. Then, if you're not careful, the clock. Because there are places in this world where time doesn't move in straight lines. And not all hours are hours meant for us. To understand the Hoia Baciu Forest, you have to forget what you think a forest is. It's not vast, not alpine or grand. It doesn't stretch for miles like labyrinths of pine in Canada or Siberia. No, it's small, measured, roughly 3 square kilometers of low, warped trees and knotted undergrowth, just enough to get inside and lose your place. On satellite maps, it looks ordinary, even thin, but for decades, it's been called the Bermuda Triangle of Transylvania. What gets lost here isn't always visible. It's time, it's pitch, it's the memory of what walking felt like 5 minutes ago. Ask a local. They'll shrug, say the stories are old. Sometimes they laugh. Sometimes they won't answer at all. But there are always quiet patterns under the brush of storytelling. Watches that stop or hasten. People who walk in for half an hour, then emerge before they began. Photographs developed with shadows of people not remembered in places never visited. The forest has no official welcome sign. But for generations, everyone has heard the rules. Don't sleep beneath the leaning trees. Don't answer what speaks in your voice. And never count time as your own inside those paths. The first documented case happened in 1968. A military technician, Emil Barnia, camped at the forest's edge with his partner and 2 friends. The day was bright and clear, with no rain scheduled for days. Around noon, he photographed what appeared to be a metallic disc hovering soundlessly above the clearing's famous bald patch, a perfect circle where no vegetation grows. The photos are grainy, but the story lived longer than the paper it was printed on. Not because of the UFO, but because of what came next. They reported lost time. The hours before and after the sighting blurred, memories jumbled. 3 voices remembered 4 people speaking. Breakfast dishes were found unwashed that none recalled using. There were no injuries, no scars, only that strange weightlessness in their recollections, like an erasure carried out without force. Be polite, the old people say. The forest doesn't owe you a single answer. Since then, the stories have multiplied quietly, shared between university offices. Occasionally, news clippings, most quietly folded away after the facts stopped holding their shape. In 1974, a 5-year-old girl went missing for hours during a family picnic. The clearing was full of people, everyone searching. Just as authorities were called, she reappeared, without a scratch, just a few steps from where her parents had last seen her. She had no memory of leaving, no hunger, no dirt on her shoes. Only one strange detail. Clutched in her hands were flowers that do not grow in Romania. She would later dream, again and again, of the room made of bark and the trees shaped like watching men. What makes Hoia Baciu frightening isn't death. It's distortion. It doesn't reach out with claws. It folds things. Softly. A trail that begins straight tightens into a spiral when you look away. The sun dims a little too soon. Cameras show you walking paths you're certain you never took. And the central clearing, the bald spot, remains impossible. No grass. No life. No soil change to explain why. Just a smooth ellipse with no radiation spikes, no nutrient imbalances. Some researchers bring sensors, magnetometers, heart monitors, electromagnetic readers. Most report nothing consistent. Just failure. As one technician said in an old interview, everything records until the moment it doesn't want to be watched anymore. Then, lights flicker, time skips, and files disappear from the drive with no trace of deletion. It's not technology failing. It's attention ending. Even now, Hoia Baciu is not a hostile place. It's beautiful by many accounts. Quiet, moss-packed and pale green in the spring, with trees that tilt as though frozen mid-thought. But still, visitors lose direction within minutes. Not due to poor signage, but because shadows shift with no sun above, and footsteps stop echoing, even on hard ground. One foreign ecologist compared it to walking inside a turned-in pocket, where the usual lines of nature get tucked behind something unseen. The birds move strangely. Deer do not walk through. And the wind, when it comes, tastes faintly of metal. Even today, search and rescue logs record occasional disappearances. All brief, all unsolved. A man on a solo hike goes silent at 4 p.m. found again near Main Road by 417. Drenched in sweat, eyes unfocused, totally mute for hours. A drone loses GPS, returns autonomously. Camera footage scrambled, except for 1 second, where multiple trees seem to move forward toward the drone, not away. A woman reports hearing a bell tied to her childhood bicycle. A bicycle never brought to Romania. Hoia Baciu, even in stillness, is moving, but not outward, inward. It unfurls like a loop, a shape, a system not built for things as linear as human thoughts. In the end, the forest does not steal time. It simply refuses to follow ours. Inside its boundary, no clock keeps its promise. No timestamp holds. No moment remains isolated. As though the forest is not a place, but a measurement. And what you measure within it begins to measure you back. And in 2019, someone tried to do just that. Not a ghost hunter. Not a local. A botanist with careful tools and calibrated theories. She approached the clearing with data in mind. She left with answers she would not write down. Dr. Marta Socolova did not believe in haunted forests. She was 39, respected in her field, and held 2 research grants. One from the Romanian Academy of Sciences, another from a European Climate Foundation. She studied moss. Resilient moss. The kind that survives where little else grows. She came to Cluj in early spring of 2019, chasing one thing: thermal spore moss. Rare, heat-stable, typically found near geothermal activity or areas where microclimates form unnaturally. Patches of it had been documented. Once, on the northern slope near Hoia Baciu's clearing. Marta saw that as an anomaly worth cataloging. Nothing more. She rented a flat with a narrow balcony, unpacked 3 weeks' worth of field gear, and drove to the forest in a rented car armed only with maps, sensors, and a borrowed drone. Not once did she mention the legends. She didn't have to. The people she met brought them up for her. It began with a vendor in Cluj's morning market. She was buying fruit, apples, and some celery root, when she asked, half playfully, "Do taxis run past the forest in the evenings?" The woman behind the stall paused, hands still in the crate. "You shouldn't walk there late," she said. Not unkindly. Marta smiled. "I won't be far." The vendor didn't smile back. "Better not buy boots just for it. New shoes don't help you come back faster." Marta found that confusing, but harmless. The second warning came from a child. On the second afternoon she visited the clearing, Marta paused to sketch a strange depression in the moss. A shallow dip, round and dry, where insects refused to settle. She took samples. Later, resting on a bench just past the forest edge, a young boy ran past, then slowed, staring at her gear bag. He pointed at it, then said clearly, "Don't ask the trees what time it is," then sprinted off. That night, Marta dreamed of spirals. Not nightmares, just the sensation of turning in on herself, of routines repeated, of walking the same 5 steps again and again, but each time, slightly faster, slightly more watched. By the 4th day, Marta noticed something off in the footage. The wide-lens trail camera she'd mounted to a fir near the clearing showed something strange, her own figure. Walking, clicking a sample vial shut, but the timestamp was wrong. 6 minutes before she arrived. She checked again. The logging data showed recorded light shifting as Marta walked into frame, then again, from a slightly different angle. She shrugged it off. "Glitch," she said. "Heat. Interference." But quietly, she resynced her devices. Checked her phone clock against the analog one she wore on her wrist. They were off. By 17 seconds. She recalibrated, made notes, and scheduled an isolated session inside the main clearing at what she believed was high solar noon. The clearing was empty. Tranquil, almost. Birdless. Treeless. Circular as a stone pond. Nothing grows at the center. Just dry earth. Something in the soil refuses biology. Marta tested audio drift, thermal variance, and decay rate of humidity. She conducted no rituals. No seances. Just science. Her drone hovered at 12 feet above ground, taking still photos every 30 seconds. The pictures, developed later, showed her inside the clearing. Back bent, kneeling, hand reaching toward the moss. In the fourth image, she is no longer alone. A second figure appears at the edge of frame, blurry, facing away. Humanoid, tall, pale clothing. Marta insists she was alone all day. On her 7th field trip, the weather changed. No forecast had warned of fog, but the clearing was full of it. Light fog, but still, it wouldn't move. She slid her boots into the earth, mounted the solar sensor, then paused. In the middle of the clearing, someone had placed a small rock. Flat, smooth, resting atop it. A photograph, wide-bordered, faded, 6x4. A picture of her, standing, facing away from the camera, wearing her own coat, hair pinned the same way. But she had not taken that photo, nor had she seen this angle. She turned around. No one. No prints in the dirt. And when she bent to pick it up, she saw something stranger still. In the photo, her shadow stretched forward. It was taken sometime in the afternoon, but the shadow suggested morning. The time didn't match. She didn't bring the photo home. She left it there. But that night, back at her apartment, another appeared, slid under her door. Another photo of her, same clearing, same posture, different coat, different year. A year she didn't remember. On her 8th day, Marta stopped writing timestamps. They no longer matched. Instruments disagreed. Audio recordings from her own phone showed extra seconds she didn't record. Half-breaths she didn't remember taking. One session showed her snapping a sample vial shut, then repeating the motion again and again, at the exact same angle. The background shifted slightly each time. Tree limbs repositioned, like scenes. By then, she had dismissed the word glitch. Something wasn't broken. It was repeating. She didn't feel watched. She felt repeated back, as if the forest was practicing walking like her. The third warning came from a man at a bookstore near the Orthodox cathedral. He saw her purchase a regional field guide, silently approached, and tapped the corner of her map. "You've already walked this part twice," he said gently. Marta looked at him. "No, I just got here this week." He nodded. "Maybe, but the moss grows at memory, not location. If your camera takes more than 5 clicks to record 10 meters, you've gone too deep." Then he handed her a black coffee, unpaid for, and walked out. She drank only half. And the next morning, the clearing was larger. What Marta thought she was studying wasn't a plant or a temperature anomaly. It was a loop, a circle that watched itself. And soon, she would realize she was already inside it. Some maps showed a rain. Others try to reflect direction. But in Hoia Baciu, no map lasts longer than the person drawing it. Dr. Marta Socolova realized this 2 weeks into her fieldwork. After the drone footage failed. After the trail cameras showed her standing in 2 places at once. After her GPS tracker marked a 40-minute loop across 67 linear steps. She tried to redraw her understanding of the forest, not with path lines, but with timelines. 3 synchronized trail cams had been placed in a triangle around the clearing, each 10 meters apart. She triangulated movement, step cadence, ambient light. Same hour, same passage, 3 views. Something didn't agree. One camera captured her crossing the clearing in 10 seconds. Another showed 38 minutes of footage. From cam 3, no appearance at all, just wind and backward motion. The timestamps were synced. The metadata was clean, but reality wasn't. "I wasn't drifting," Marta would later write in her field journal. "I walked forward." And time re-staggered itself around me. It became harder to measure anything. A third of her samples evaporated in sealed containers. Yet others, untouched for days, grew grayer and heavier as if absorbing something from the air. The spiral rings of moss near the dead clearing had spread outward. When she checked older field photos taken 2 weeks earlier, they looked smaller. At first, she assumed growth. But the inner rings showed a faint edge, an unnatural tracing, like someone had cut around them and tried to nudge the shape wider. The spiral wasn't expanding. It was repeating. Her grid mapping began to collapse. The trail she walked each day, which should have formed a predictable square around the moss beds and camera points, began to curve. Not slope, not incline. Curve, very slightly inward. Marta started noticing strange angles in her own notes. Drawings she hadn't meant to sketch, ratios she didn't remember calculating. Once, she caught herself writing the same number over and over again in the margins. 91, 91, 91. Not a measurement. Nothing assigned to it. Just the number repeated backwards like a countdown that had forgotten which way it was going. Everything began to rewrite itself. The forest was folding, not logistically, but emotionally, internally, as if it didn't want to be known consistently, as if it was shaping itself differently each time it was remembered. The trees weren't out of place, Marta wrote, but the place they were in no longer matched how I had seen it. She tried to create a heat map from her own walking trail, proof of consistency. But when she examined the path tracings together, she found 5 identical loops, nearly perfect circles, each recorded on a different date, all starting from the same GPS timestamp. Same beginning, same step forward, 5 different bodies, 5 Marta Socolovas. Every map she created ended in the same shape, a loop inside itself, a spiral bending down into a place logic could no longer follow. Then came the 4th map, drawn by hand on grid vellum, her last attempt. No electronics, just observation. She worked in silence beneath the cold light of the kitchen bulb. The forest etched in fine pencil, the trail ringed in shadow. She began in the southwest quadrant, sketching trees large enough to remember by root system. But by the 5th tree column, the trails curled again. She had only walked in straight lines. The forest said otherwise. The map wound itself into a tight oval. Then a complete circle. The outer line met the start of the inner one like a snake closing its mouth. She hadn't drawn it consciously. Each tiny measurement had felt rational, fixed. But between breaths, between ticks of the wall clock, the clearing had redrawn itself through her hand. Marta laid the map flat, stepped back, and saw a pattern. Tiny notations in the trees. Measurements she didn't remember making. Symbols like hash marks layered under traditional cartography, subconscious, perhaps, were left by someone else. Small details she couldn't explain. Light variance rings with no color codes, moss recorded growing against gravity, a Venn diagram note. This isn't a place. It's a delay. That final sentence had appeared under her pen mid-draft, scrawled softly in the lower margin, in her handwriting, but with a pressure she didn't recognize. Marta placed the map inside her notebook and tried to sleep that night, but she woke twice without knowing. Not in bed, on the floor. The second time, she was crouched at the foot of the balcony door, squinting at something she couldn't see. Across from her, hung on the metal railing, was a string of dried moss, braided. Simple, as if someone had offered it. The pattern was familiar. It mirrored a shape she'd recorded just 2 days ago out in the spiral basin. But she hadn't brought any samples home, and no one else had a key. She returned to the clearing the next morning, found her markers slightly shifted. The fir tree she'd placed red tape on now had the tape lower down. Her stone circle for measuring shadow angles had been disturbed, but carefully, almost surgically. Near the spot where she'd last collected a sample, someone had embedded a photo, half buried in the earth. Face down. It took effort to slide it free. When she turned it over, she saw herself, again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Her own figure stood at the edge of the clearing, out of focus. Behind her, a second silhouette. Taller. Still. Shoulder turned slightly inward. Angled so you almost missed it. It cast no shadow. This time, she kept the photo. Back at her desk, she tried to match it to her calendar. But none of the timestamps matched her clothing. The backpack was older. One she discarded years ago. There were no records of that day. Only the folded map in her notebook, curving circles and spirals like fingernails growing inward. The outer ring was darker now. The paper had changed. Not creased, but thicker, almost like it had taken moisture from the air. Or from her. When Marta tried to leave the clearing the next day, she made the mistake of assuming the path would let her. The forest didn't confront her. It waited. And then, that was when time began to slip entirely. Folklore always sounds harmless until you live inside it. You tell yourself it's just metaphor. Ancient rural poetry for the natural world's unpredictability. Circles in the moss. Whispers in the brush. 3 warnings before the forest notices who you are. It wasn't until Marta tried leaving for good that the pattern finally settled in. That morning, she woke earlier than planned. Her boots were clean. Her breath fogged the mirror, twice. She heard the sound of her own footsteps on the balcony before she stepped outside. She packed her gear in silence. She had decided this trip would be her last, an unrecorded walk with no logging, no field notes, just to leave it respectfully, to close the loop. Her words, as if intention was enough. She made it 45 steps into the clearing and stopped. The spiral paths had changed again. No longer narrow, wandering trails, but wide concentric rings. As if the forest had grown itself into architecture, pine needles now rested in deliberate arcs. A curving gate of birch limbs had collapsed to mark an occult ellipse near the base of the slope. No footprints, no animals, no sound. And in the center, where the clearing had once looked bald and sterile, there appeared moss. Circular tufts, perfectly shaped. Each patch identical in size, like someone had measured growth by geometric law. At the center of the largest circle, her dropped pen, the red one. She hadn't used it since her second week. And she hadn't dropped it. Not yet. The forest felt expectant. There was no wind. Not stillness either. Just pressure, like the low air before thunder. And in that pressure, Marta remembered the first thing the forest had given back, a photograph of herself, taken from behind. Then the second, a number she didn't recall writing. 91, again and again. And now, this, a place remembering her before loss, showing her what she would let go. She turned back, followed the original trail angle toward the car. She walked for 16 measured minutes. Uphill, past the same leaning pine. Paused at a familiar boulder with the lichen etched into star shapes. Then, there it was again. The clearing. Same angle. Same moss circles. She checked her watch. It had not moved. And yet, her breathing had. As though she had exerted herself through time, but time had declined to acknowledge the transaction. Another 20 steps. Same exit. Same path. Different entry point. A spatial loop disguised as direction. A circle worn inside a spiral. The forest was not holding her body. It was holding her choices. Every movement forward created a replica moment, familiar. Wrong. Returned to her again and again until she understood. You do not leave Hoia Baciu until it allows you to leave. And it will not allow you until you know why you came. That night, she went into town. She did not speak to anyone. Just sat at a bar, then left her notebook behind on purpose. Part of her hoped someone would read it and explain it all, picture by picture, map by misshapen map. Instead, the bartender chased her down 5 minutes later. You left this, he said, handing the field journal back, and then paused, pointed toward the middle pages. Where'd you copy this symbol from? It was a circle, divided once, then spiraled in on itself. He pointed with care. Old shepherds used to draw this on fence posts, back when that land still had pasture. She said nothing, just nodded. He looked at her again. You've had 3, haven't you? She blinked. 3. He tapped the counter softly. The forest doesn't give you more. You get 3. He ticked them off with the edge of his fingernail. A sight. A sound. A shift. He paused. If you keep walking past all 3, it starts seeing you as part of itself. It was then Marta remembered. 1. Her voice on the recorder before she spoke. 2. The photograph she never took. 3. The loop that wouldn't break. That was it. 3 signs. 1 per rule. Every villager knew this, though no two agreed on what exactly the forest did. Some said it folds you inward until you forget. Others say it doesn't touch you at all. It just waits for you to understand what you are. But once you reach the 3rd boundary, the forest adjusts, not to harm you, simply to see what you've become. Later that year, she visited a family west of Cluj-Napoca, a village deeper in the hills. She'd heard they were known for holding the old warnings. Not written, just spoken. The matriarch, Ioana, was in her 70s. She heard Marta's story, listened without once blinking, then nodded slowly, and recited, effortlessly. You may walk the shape once, curious, twice, accidental. But if you touch the circle 3 times without leaving anything behind, you start echoing, not living, just layering. For several days after that, Marta wouldn't go near the forest. She kept the lights on at night, refused to turn mirrors toward the balcony, not from fear, but because she no longer trusted that the reflection would be from now. The loops didn't just distort memory. They joined things, changes that began in infinitesimal degrees. A step becoming a shuffle, a voice echoing behind. Half a beat too late, a shadow broadening into someone else's shape. There was no scream, no flash, just being returned to a place you thought you'd already left. Days later, in her notebook, a note appeared, handwritten in her own script, but she swore she hadn't written it. The third time isn't punishment. It's permission. You don't leave Hoia Baciu because you've finished. You leave it when the forest decides you haven't given it anything worth keeping. And for Marta, it hadn't let go yet. It didn't happen with thunder. There was no snap of light, no warping of air like sudden cinematic time travel. It came slow. The kind of slow that makes you realize the clock on the wall isn't broken. You've just been watching it wrong. That's how Marta described it. It wasn't like time froze, she wrote in her private journal. It was like time slowly inhaled, then held its breath. She returned to the forest 7 days after her final conversation in Lida. There were no cameras this time. No instruments. No drone overhead. She wore the same coat as her first visit, even though the weather had changed. At the clearing's edge, she paused, took one step in. The trees didn't move, but she felt them notice. For 73 minutes, according to her watch, she wandered, through loops that no longer hid their curvature. The moss underfoot grew in chevrons now, angled left to pull the eye subtly clockwise. Even her body leaned right, like walking a funnel that narrowed by suggestion, not measurement. She breathed evenly, spoke to no one, and still, she heard it. A distant hitch in the silence. Not a footstep, not a voice. A shifting of rhythm. She turned. Nothing moved. But in the corner of her vision, the trees had aligned behind her. Straight, perfectly spaced. A corridor. At the precise center of the clearing, where moss never grew before, stood the same flat stone from her earlier visit. But now it was carved. A line, then a curve, then a second line folded into the first. She knelt there, but didn't take a sample. The moment asked for stillness, not science. It was there, kneeling, that the forest breathed in again. A push of wind, low and cooling. Not cold, not unfriendly, just a pause. The silence deepened into tone. Not music, not voice, but something with shape. Time had not stopped. It had stepped aside. The footage Marta reviewed later didn't match what she remembered. Her trail cam, left running out of habit on a base setting, showed her standing in that circle near the stone, then pausing mid-step, frozen, eyes open, body weight hanging on the front toe of her left foot, as if she had made a choice, but hadn't completed the motion yet. For 8 minutes, she didn't move. Leaves shifted behind her. Shadows flickered in and out. One lasted too long. A pale blur in the tree line. Tall, still. And then, in a separate frame, Marta stepped forward again, finishing the motion as if time had been waiting for her to catch up. Later that day, in her apartment, the photograph reappeared. Not a copy, not a reprint. The very same photograph. The one she'd seen earlier, herself in the clearing, but it now bore a second version. The second figure no longer obscured, not blurred, standing next to her, leaning slightly toward her shoulder. Skin pale, mouth flat, her own eyes. Her. She burned it in the sink. It did not smoke. The edges curled but refused to blacken. She tried again. 3 matches spent, the paper stubborn. In the end, she folded the image and submerged it in salt water. Let it stay there for 3 days. When she checked again, the image was blank, but the frame of her outline remained, as if her position still existed, even without her photo inside it. 2 days later, Marta's neighbor called the police. He'd heard footsteps on the fiberboard balcony for over an hour. Back and forth. Measured. One set. But Marta hadn't answered the door in 2 days. When officers arrived, they found the apartment empty. Untouched dinner. Unmade bed. Phone still charging. And in the center of the coffee table, a small note. I'm not lost. I'm just waiting where the forest paused. They filed the report under non-emergency missing person. But the local archivist marked the date. She already recognized the pattern. Marta reappeared 1 week later. She walked into the university's botanical conservatory just before closing and returned her borrowed key. The student working the desk asked if she was all right. All caught up, Marta said. No one asked where she'd been, though several noted small changes. She wore her old coat again, despite the sudden heat. She hummed under her breath while walking, and her posture was different, more upright, like memory reintegrating itself, slowly. She did not return to the forest again, but she recorded one last tape, found years later in the archival drawer beneath her burned field notes. No formal introduction, no timestamps, just Marta's voice in the dark. They don't trap us. They just wait until we move like they do. Everything circles in here, even thought, even self. A pause. Then, softer. The clearing doesn't erase you. It just listens long enough to answer back. And sometimes, the answer looks like you. Not everything the forest returns is broken, but what it gives back often remembers things you've never lived. And that's when the confusion becomes permanent. The strangest thing about what happened to Marta Socolova is that she came back. People disappear in forests. That's not a mystery. That's a kindness the world gives us now and then. But what makes Hoia Baciu different, what sets it apart from every map it denies, is that sometimes it does send people back. Only, not everything returns with them. Marta re-entered her life quietly. No dramatic entrance. No police call. Just walking onto her balcony mid-morning 6 days after she was last seen, coffee in hand, shade pulled low across her face. Her neighbor saw her. She waved. The man raised his hand, confused. Because he'd seen 3 officers banging on that same door last week. He'd heard the silence. He'd seen the untouched meal. But now she stood there. Same coat. Same boots. Same watch. Only, when asked later, the neighbor would insist something was wrong with her reflection in the window. Nothing dramatic. Just off. The movement was half a beat delayed. Like her image was still trying to remember what waving was. Back inside, Marta began writing again. Not research. Not analysis. Just paragraphs. Scattered thoughts. She spoke little to no Romanian now. Only English. Even in the cafes she once frequented. She sat at her usual table and ordered the same tea. But she never sipped it while it was hot. She always waited until it cooled, then discarded it entirely, as though the act was familiar. But the taste was something returned wrong. One afternoon, she mailed a thin, manila envelope to the woman who ran the folklore collection at the regional archive. No note, no sender. Inside were 3 photographs, blank-faced duplicates of herself in the clearing, a moss sample in a sterile glass container, a page torn from her field notebook, with handwriting that shifted styles halfway through at the bottom, written in smaller script. Nothing inside here is mine now, but I am still shaped by it. The envelope was marked with a post office stamp from the train station, but surveillance showed no one mailing it. Marta's family received a package weeks later. A leather-bound journal with an entry on the first page, reading, "If I forget you, let me know gently. If I return ahead of myself, wait." Nothing else. Just the familiar scent of moss. Her sister said she hadn't opened the box at first, because it was already on their kitchen table before the mail had arrived. In Cluj, Marta was seen often after that. On buses. In markets. Walking past the empty parking lot where the trail used to begin. But every photograph of her taken afterward, whether from a vending machine, a pedestrian crossing cam, or even a wedding she briefly attended, showed something strange. Her shape was clean, her smile soft, but the edges of her image blurred, just fading. Like her outline had been photocopied one too many times. And reality could no longer recreate her sharply. She was recognized by friends, but they often misremembered how long they'd known her. Some said 3 years, others since college. One swore she was new to town. None were correct. The most alarming change came not to Marta's body, but to her presence. Things forgot her. Doors she closed were later found ajar. Devices she used had no logged activity. Her reflection in windows did not always turn away when she did. One glass storefront held her movement for a second longer, eyes still fixed on the viewer, while the real Marta had already passed out of frame. Her landlord entered the apartment one day after a week of no rent. Everything was clean. Too clean. Her toiletries unused. Coffee untouched. Shoes neatly placed. Too neatly. The exact same angle for both. He opened the fridge. Inside, 2 sealed containers. One with moss. One with a map. No name. Just a piece of paper taped to the inside door. Return what's quiet. Keep what's blurred. He closed the fridge and left without speaking. She was never seen again. No formal disappearance. No incident report. But those who had known her stopped talking about her the same way. Instead of saying Marta was a researcher, they'd say, "She studied that forest once." Her name lost weight. Language began bending around her absence. Even the forest seemed to lose track of her. The spiraling moss rings diminished slightly. The trees didn't lean as hard toward walking feet. The clearing grew gentler, as though it had nothing else to ask for the time being. Some say the forest let her go. Others say it forgot to keep her. that it made a copy too faithful, too early, and the original never caught up. There is one final account. A woman matching Marta's description was seen in a small rural station past Turda, boarding a local train with no listed destination. The security footage shows her several times, always alone, always shadowed. But when the camera caught her face near the platform, just for a second, she turned slightly too late, as if sound had reached her from ahead, not behind. And around her wrist, a moss bracelet, bound in 3 loops. Whatever returned from Hoia Baciu in Marta's form walked the right roads, wore the right shoes. But it left the same way all spirals end, not with a line, but with a curve that never closed. There are no warning signs at the forest's edge, no fences, no welcome plaques, only soft trails that fold back on themselves, and stories shared too late to be useful. What people learn about Hoia Baciu doesn't come from scientists. It comes from those who walked in, came back changed, or didn't come back at all. It comes from the quiet knowledge you don't make rules unless something broke first. The archivists in Cluj call them the 12 repeating rules. Not commandments, not superstition, just habit, hardened by repetition. No one's certain how old the list is. There are notes from 1962, a margin in a forestry manual scrawled in charcoal. Leave an offering if you must linger. A 1979 police report about a lost hiker includes the strange line. He brought no bread, no thread, no paper copy of himself. That's likely why. Each rule has circulated orally, shaped by the mouths that keep them alive. 13 are often spoken, but only 12 ever stay. The 13th gets forgotten, usually. When it's spoken, the speaker tends not to remember what it was by nightfall. They're not fixed, one old woman said. They shift, but they rhyme in pattern. That's how you know they keep working. These are the 12 that return the most. 1. Don't ask the forest for time. Ask for direction instead. Clocks bend out there. They don't break. They just misunderstand. But the land remembers shape. Look for the curve that leads toward the wind. 2. If light fades too quickly, stop walking. Sunlight should take time to leave. If shadow arrives without warning, you've passed the hour the land gave you. 3. Count your steps only if you can stop at 10. Never more, never fewer. 10 is not a number here. 10 is a gate. Anything beyond lets the spiral notice you're present. For don't speak your name if you hear it repeated. Something else may be trying it on for size. And once it fits, it won't hang it back in your closet. 5. Photos taken at noon should show clear shadows. If they don't, burn them. Light lies here. It shapes itself around memory more than mass. A shadowless image is an invitation to echo. 6. Sleep outside the trees, never beneath crowning branches. Branches above braid thought. You may wake up not knowing which version of yourself returned. 7. Don't correct your compass. Observe it. When the needle spirals, it's not confused. It's sounding for permission. 8. If moss appears on your skin, it isn't growth, it's memory. You weren't marked. You were selected. Wipe gently. Don't scrape. 9. If you find your own footprints, and they're returning toward you, don't follow them. They belong to someone else now. Someone with your gait, your weight, but different intentions. 10. Anything shaped in perfect circles is not natural. Don't step through. Nothing in Hoia Baciu is perfect except what was taught to be. 11. Leave something behind. If it's returned cleaner than you left it, do not take it home. The forest offers back only what it had time to think about. And thought is currency in a place with no clocks. 12. If you remember something you haven't lived, write it down. Then burn it. The spiral feeds on echoes. Sacrifice it before it settles. These rules don't offer protection. They offer politeness. The forest, it seems, is too old to be evil. It's indifferent, but it listens. Marta learned that, though she may not have written all of them herself. Some appeared in her notebooks with no author named. Others arrived on her phone's notes app with no record of being typed. She once found a sticky note under her camera lens that read, Rule 7. Again, please. Nothing else. The rules are not guaranteed. They don't work like spells, but they help define a kind of rhythm. And if the forest recognizes your rhythm, it may let you pass. When locals speak of the rules, they do so gently, never in full daylight, never all 12 at once. One retired guide named Marion recites only paired lines, never solo. Rule 3 is always followed by Rule 4, so the thought doesn't get caught in between. Marion had a brother, Anton, who wandered too deeply in spring of 1984. He returned blank behind the eyes. He didn't speak for 3 days. Then one morning, he said, "I counted 11. I shouldn't have." And he walked into the treeline barefoot. They never saw him again. But every April 5th, small stones arranged themselves on Marion's windowsill. Always in sets of 11. Always clean. Some visitors ignore the rules entirely. They joke, they film, they leave plastic on the ground. The forest doesn't punish them. But sometimes, the people in their photos stop resembling them halfway through the roll. Sometimes, they dream of spirals even in the city. Sometimes, they forget what year they came to Romania. And then there is the 13th rule, the forgotten one, the one no one keeps quite straight. Librarians have notes of it scrawled upside down. Elders remember it only until dusk. A folklorist once wrote it into her journal as, "If something finds you early, leave something of yourself behind." But she crossed it out later, uncertain where it came from. That seems to be its nature. The 13th rule survives only until it's truly understood. Then it disappears, taking memory with it. The rules are not there to save you. They're there to teach you how not to be noticed. Because in Hoia Baciu, walking doesn't take time. But being remembered does. Some say the forest only listens. Others believe it remembers. But a few now ask a different question. What if time itself is what Hoia Baciu protects and warps for reasons older than memory? The rules, whispered from porch to porch, are meant to keep the forest from brushing too close. But the deeper truth is simpler. Hoia Baciu does not forget. It stores every footfall, every breath, every stray thought, cataloged the way tree rings hold drought years. Inside those rings, time is not a line. It's sap, swirling and thick, moving only when heat calls it upward. That is why clocks stutter here, why cameras misexpose, why people leave carrying memories they never lived. In late autumn, a small film crew arrived from Bucharest. 3 friends working on a graduate project about Romanian anomalies. They set up camp on the South Ridge, while outside the clearing, certain they could respect the lore while still capturing it. They followed Rule 2, halting whenever the light shifted. They followed Rule 5, burning every shadowless frame. What they forgot was Rule 12. On their 3rd night, the director, Anna, sat alone, reviewing footage. She watched herself in the clearing, calling time code, clapping the slate. Then, in the next clip, she was standing 20 meters away, same posture, same slate, same breath leaving her lips. But the clapper read a number she had not yet reached. She scrubbed backward, 14B, forward, 16A, backward again, 15B, out of sequence, out of sense. Her notes show the moment panic set in. My own future is editing the reel. She stepped outside the tent, needing air. The forest greeted her with a hush so complete that her pulse felt noisy. A path of pale moss glimmered under the moon, curving gently toward the old clearing. Anna knew enough to stay put. Instead, she lifted her phone to photograph the glow, once, quickly. The display flashed, then went black. When it reignited, a new image sat in the gallery. Anna, kneeling on that same moss path, hours older, mud on her knees, eyes closed as though listening for something beneath the soil. She never took that picture. She locked the phone, shoved it away, and whispered her own name, once, just to feel solid. The forest answered back a half-second later, same pitch, same throat, same tired breath. Rule 4. Broken. They left at dawn. Packed fast, no breakfast, no last shots. Driving out, the sound engineer glanced in the side view mirror and saw a smear of motion behind them. 3 figures on the treeline, pacing. 2 men. 1 woman wearing Anna's red jacket, the one she had never taken off. When the car reached the asphalt, the engine clock reset to midnight. A glitch, they thought, until their phones showed the same. Back in Bucharest, they discovered all 3 passports now listed identical birth hours, 4 minutes apart, no matter their actual birthdays. Time had decided to average them. Their professor called it data corruption. They called it the forest remembering them incorrectly and writing that memory onto whatever paper it could reach. Stories like theirs accumulate in the archives, each a small knot in the larger tangle. A cyclist rides the perimeter trail and returns with mud baked on his tires from a rain that fell 2 days later. A wedding party poses for pictures near the lattice trees. The photos develop fine except for the bride, who appears twice. Once smiling with everyone, once standing alone on the far left edge, facing away. A retired soldier walks his dog at dusk and comes home at dusk. Same sky, same light. But the bread he'd left rising has overproofed, and the answering machine is full of calls timestamped tomorrow. None of these people vanish. They simply fracture, like glass etched by frost. Visible, functional, but always carrying the pattern of that cold. Time, it seems, is the forest's native language. Speak it poorly, and it will correct you. Speak it fluently, and it may start answering questions you never asked. Ioana, the matriarch who recited the 3 warning verse, has her own phrase for it. Hoia Baciu nu rapest oral, lo intoars p dos. Hoia Baciu doesn't steal hours, it turns them inside out. When she was 16, she followed her older brother into the pines to gather mushrooms. They separated at a fork. She saw him again only a heartbeat later, standing on the wrong side of the trail, shirt damp with dew though the ground was dry. She laughed, called him slow. He stared back uncertain, as if meeting her for the first time. They walked home together in silence. That evening, their mother screamed. The brother had already been home for an hour, sitting at the table, shirt crisp, hair dry, waiting for supper. 2 versions, one fading by midnight. Eyes dimming, speech slurring, until it simply reclined in the yard and stopped. The body felt cold, but not dead. By dawn it was gone, leaving only flattened grass and the smell of damp bark. The remaining brother never again entered the forest, and when asked, he could not recall which of him had survived. Marta's case added a final riddle. Her notes, what survived of them, reveal stretches of text she never consciously wrote. Paragraphs describing decades she had not lived. Winter 1973. The pines wore ice like mirrors. I measured the echo at 7 seconds. Autumn 2041. The clearing shrank. We counted 11 rings where once there were 8. Future and past braided like vines. Researchers debated forgery, but the ink matched her pens, and the pages bore her fingerprints, overlaid 3 times, as if pressed on different dates. Time had kept Marta's body, but divided her perspective, letting pieces of her drift across its own tide and dribble back whenever the current reversed. What does the forest want with these fragments? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps Hoia Baciu is merely a harbor where loose moments wash ashore. A shoreline of stray possibilities, shells of minutes that never found their hour. Stand still inside the clearing long enough, and you can almost feel them brush your ankles, cool, curious, slipping past. Listen closely, and you may hear your own voice from some day that hasn't happened, calling you away from the path you thought you chose. The rules try to dam that tide. They tell you to burn the photos, to count only to 10, to anchor yourself with an object the forest can't easily polish clean. But anchors rust. Paper smolders. Numbers blur. Time remembers what you don't, and sooner or later it delivers the forgotten piece, whether your hands are ready to hold it or not. And when Hoia Baciu finally misplaces its grip, when the spiral slips and the hourglass cracks, what walks back through the treeline might still wear your shape, but the forest will know different. There comes a moment, unmarked by clocks, when Hoia Baciu seems to blink. Not a tremor, not a light, simply a collective easing of tension in the trunks, as if the trees finish reading whatever story your footsteps have been writing. Locals call it the eye. They say if you're inside the spiral when the eye opens, the forest will remember you forever, and your own memory must decide whether to stay obedient. On an early winter evening, the archivist Dorrell, called north from Bucharest to catalog Marta's remaining journals, walked the outer ring to test folklore against fact. She carried none of the usual gear, no EM reader, no thermal lens. Only a Polaroid, a pencil, and a strip of copper wire twisted into a circle. At the boundary stone she paused, touching 2 fingers to the moss. The temperature dropped by half a degree, nothing dramatic, just enough for breath to become visible. She took 1 photo of the empty path, waved it in the cold air, and slid it face down into her coat. Rule 5 obeyed. Then she waited. 5 minutes. 10. Stillness folded over stillness until noise itself felt impolite. A twig snapped behind her. A fox, perhaps. May it not turn. She knew the forest preferred forward attention. Looking back could invite a loop that might never unlock. Instead, she recited the short litany the villagers teach their children. Step 1, borrow. Step 2, listen. Step 3, leave what you borrowed cleaner than you found it. The air released its held breath. A single snowflake drifted, caught on the sleeve of her notebook, and did not melt. Time had opened its eye. Every recorded incident shares 3 traits. 1, a sensory swap, warmth sounding like color, cold tasting of iron. 2, a duplicate object, watch, pen, photograph, return brighter, weightless, not wholly real. 3, a decision no witness can later recall making. In 1996, 2 surveyors mapping soil acidity stepped through an eye and found a fresh thermos of coffee waiting at their tripod, identical to the one they'd left in the truck, except the initials were carved in reverse. They drank none of it, left it behind. By noon, their own thermos was still steaming, though the truck cabin registered -3 degrees Celsius. They never spoke of the detail in reports, only at taverns, where the story gathered the soft edges of myth. In 2004, a pair of botanists counted 11 rings in the center clearing, 3 more than any previous measurement, then returned the next day to find 8 again. Their lab notebooks, however, retained the sketches of 11. Ink won't lie, they said, but ink can be persuaded to remember differently. Marta's unpublished tape records her eye moment in a single line. I was either welcomed or replaced, and I still don't know which. Afterward, the tape hisses for 60 seconds, breath, wind, or the sound of unspooling choices. May's own moment unfolded without spectacle. She felt a subtle tug at the hem of her coat. No fingers, just momentum, like stepping off a boat that hasn't stopped. In that motion, she understood why Rule 3 ends at 10. The 11th step belongs to something else, something keen on choreography. She placed the copper ring on a bare root and backed away 3 paces. The hush slackened. The forest, apparently, accepted the trade. When she reached the road again, her watch showed the same minute she'd left. Her pulse told a different story, beating as though she'd hiked for hours. Only back in her rented room did she remember the Polaroid. She peeled it from her pocket, still face down, edges damp. The image revealed 2 paths, one empty, one bearing a distant silhouette. Hard to see, but the figure's coat collar matched May's exactly, though she could swear she'd been alone. She set the photo under a lamp. Its colors shifted toward green, then steadied. Fine grains of moss clung to the border, spelling nothing yet communicating enough. You walked the hour walked you. What, then, is the moral? Folklore insists on lessons, but Hoia Baciu resists neat endings. It offers diagrams instead, loops closing, loops reopening, reminding us that time is less river, more tidal, swirling fragments until one day a fragment looks up and sees us seeing it. Maybe the forest is not malevolent. Maybe it is simply heavy with stored possibilities and leaks them when a curious mind knocks too loudly. A place where spare seconds, discarded alternate steps, and unworn smiles gather like mist, waiting for anyone porous enough to absorb them. If that is true, the rules are not cages, they are umbrellas. Thin protection under strange weather. And the 13th, ever-vanishing rule? Some archivists now write it as, carry humility large enough to be forgotten. Carry wonder small enough to fit through a closing loop. It is remembered only until someone asks, what does that mean? At which point the ink pales, and the words slide off the page like water. Today, tourists still hike the outer ridges. They post filtered photos, #haunted forest, and leave with nothing worse than muddy boots. But every season, a few images surface online, faces smudged double, shadows pointing north at noon, before accounts go private and captions change to prayer hand emojis. Marta Socolova is listed as researcher emerita at her old institute, though colleagues admit she never re-entered the building. Her keycard still pings the door occasionally, timestamps landing hours before the guards arrive. And somewhere on a corkboard in the Cluj archive, May's Polaroid hangs behind glass. One path empty, one occupied by a coat that mirrors hers. Half the visitors don't notice the second coat. Half swear there are 2 figures, not one. The curator stopped arguing. The count seems to depend on how long the viewer stares. how willingly their own minutes bend. If you travel there, if you stand at the cusp where moss glows like low embers, remember a simpler arithmetic than hours and minutes. One step to borrow, one breath to listen, one offering to leave. Then go. Leave quietly, as though closing a sleeping child's door. Because Hoia Baciu does not slam gates. It only turns the handle slowly, checking whether you've taken more than you brought. And should you ever feel the forest exhale, the air thickening as if an unseen lung is settling, know that the eye is waking again. Lower your gaze. Speak no names, not even your own. Let time look past you. Let it keep whatever stories it was about to tell. In this way, by becoming briefly forgettable, you may step back into ordinary weather, ordinary years, carrying nothing but a faint scent of damp bark and a Polaroid that refuses to focus. Call it a mercy, or call it proof that the strangest chronicle of Hoia Baciu is not the hours it steals, but the futures it quietly decides you no longer need. The forest blinks, the spiral loosens, and for now, your shadow falls in the correct direction again.